Today I'll be talking about small charities and how poorly we regulate them. But we're not talking about pennies here. In 2018, 501c3 public charities reported $5.4 trillion in assets and $2.7 trillion in revenues, with over $400 billion in donations from regular people, all of which is tax deductible. So who's in charge? The IRS. And as you might suspect, they have other things on their mind. So much so that applications for 501c3 tax exemption was a pretty low priority, and there was a huge backlog of applications. As a charity lawyer, I spent most of my time asking the IRS, where's my client's tax exempt application? So much so that the IRS created a website called Where's My Tax Exempt Application? And last time I checked, it was about a year behind. But if you go today, it says, oh, we don't count that anymore. And if you submit your application, you should hear from us within 90 days. I had a client wait almost 2 years. So how do we go from 2 years to 90 days? Well, let's talk about the traditional tax-exempt application process and how it has changed. Until recently, every organization that wanted to be a 501c3 charity completed the same form, the Form 1023. This is a behemoth document. Blank was about 26 pages, and once completed, ballooned to almost 100 pages long. Among all the things that it asked for was a promise that your charity was restricted to charitable activities and that when you dissolve, that money will be used for charitable purposes and not simply pocketed by the founders. In 2014, in response to that backlog, the IRS created the 1023-EZ for smaller charities, those that anticipate $50,000 or less in annual gross receipts. Unlike the 1023, it required no proof of the limitation of activities or that dissolution requirement. It's 2.5 pages long, completed completely online. Now, these are obviously much different documents. The IRS thinks it takes about 105 hours to complete the 1023 and only 19 hours to complete the 1023-EZ. In my experience, it was about 30 minutes. The good news, the IRS backlog was solved. The bad news, it's easier to get C3 status than a library card, and many unworthy charities get status. As an example, this charity was formed by a family member who became a quadriplegic because of an accident and was unable to pay their medical expenses. Now, this is a worthy cause, but not a public charity, because you'd be raising public dollars to help one person, which is a private charity, which should not have 501c3 status. But maybe that doesn't bother us. But a recently formed charity in Florida has a charitable purpose to promote the Mopar brand. Now, needless to say, there is nothing charitable about supporting a for-profit car parts manufacturer. But despite this obvious shortcoming, the IRS gave them C3 status. Donations to this company are tax deductible, and despite the fact that it's basically an advertising firm for a for-profit company, they don't pay any taxes. Another example, Idaho's Mount Zion Church Corporation. It's a church, which is a charity under law, but when it dissolves, it plans to divvy up its assets amongst its members. So another way of saying that is it'll collect tax-deductible donations and then just share it amongst all the insiders, which is absolutely against charity law and should have been caught by the IRS. For the same reason, Sticks and Stones Curling, a charity dedicated to the sport of wheelchair curling, also fails the dissolution requirement because when it dissolves, it plans to divvy its assets up amongst its members. Now you might be thinking, who cares? Who cares if they distribute their assets to members? It's part of the charitable class, right? Well, if you think about it, a person can form an organization, get C3 status through this streamlined process where there's very little scrutiny, raise a bunch of tax-deductible donations, decide to dissolve, and then simply pocket all the money. It's kind of a pathway, an easy pathway, to fraud, and it threatens to cheapen the meaning of 501c3 status. To see how bad the problem was, I conducted a study of 500 1023-EZ filers in 5 different states. I chose these particular states because they provided different formation processes, which is the step right before you apply to the IRS for 501c3 status. So I was assuming the IRS was not magically going to find money to do its job, and I wanted to see if any states were doing a good job of creating compliant charities. Here's what I found out. Florida was about 40% compliant, Ohio was only a third, Idaho was way down near 20%, and North Carolina and Maryland were 80% and 95% compliant respectively. Now, we have 2 clear winners here, so I wanted to scrutinize Maryland and North Carolina's formation process to see if they're doing something that we might be able to replicate. As I looked more closely at these 2 states, I learned that Maryland provided very little information, and North Carolina actually provided kind of a complicated process for forming, which led me to the kind of counterintuitive conclusion that North Carolina is the better choice. And let me tell you why. If you go to Maryland's Secretary of State website, this is how you form a nonprofit entity. The state automatically includes the language that the IRS requires. You literally cannot form a nonprofit corporation in Maryland without having the IRS's special language. This process is obviously efficient. Remember, Maryland had 95% compliance, but it's kind of thoughtless, and the formers maybe don't know what that language means. North Carolina takes a very different approach. Rather than giving that language to you, it sends you to another document which suggests the type of language that the IRS is looking for. This is a more cumbersome process, requires more work out of the incorporators, but I like it because it serves an educational process, an educational purpose. And formers in North Carolina might know more about charity law. Now you might be thinking, man, I'm bored. Why do I care? Why do I care? Does this really affect me if these folks are giving tax deductions for their donations? Do I care if they don't pay taxes? You know what? I'd probably rather the IRS focus on going after for-profits who don't pay their taxes. Well, let me make the argument for why I think you should care. People give to charities because they care, but also because it feels good to give to charities. This is known as the warm glow effect of charitable giving. Now think about what happens to that warm glow if we find out that a significant percentage of nonprofit founders can simply pocket the donations, can just keep our generosity. Quite literally, the sector might disappear. Soup kitchens, homeless shelters, disaster relief operations may cease to exist because they rely upon the generosity of normal people to give donations. Now, there might be some support from federal and local governments in terms of grants, but that's just another way of saying that we support these organizations and we want our governments to support them. So to keep the donations going and to keep our charities that we care about alive and well, we need to ensure they are formed correctly and not violating fundamental principles of charity law. We can no longer rely upon the IRS to do so. North Carolina has provided a model, as has Maryland. They provided cheap and easy ways to ensure that states can create compliant charities in the void left by the IRS. Thank you.